Yeah, well, hi. Well, thank you so much for having me. First of all, it's a real pleasure to be here. So I'm Payal Doshi, and I am the author of Ria and the Blood of the Nectar, which is a middle grade fantasy with South Asian representation about 12-year-old Ria, who goes on this thrilling and secret quest to find her brother Rohan, who goes missing on the night that they turn 12. Um, my journey, my gosh, to becoming an author is a long one. It started when I was 23 years old. I wasn't one of those lucky few who knew as a kid that I want to be an author ever since they were 8 years old or something like that. I came into it after doing my bachelor's in management and master's in management. But I guess I had that need and want to write. So I was frustrated at my job one day. I was working for a magazine publishing firm at the time. And I decided, I'm going to write something I want to write. I just want to get something out. And so I powered up my laptop and I wrote these two paragraphs just off the top of my head. And it has now turned into this book, basically. So it was like the most joyous experience of my life. I'd never felt that fulfilled, and I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. And I have no background in writing. Well, later on I did, but at the time I had no background in writing. I'd not studied with English literature or anything. It was just, it was all out of pure love of reading that sort of got me into this. So then fast forward, I write the first draft of this book and I realize I need some help here. Like I'm doing a lot of this just on my own and I don't know if any of it is good. So then I came to the US to get my master's in creative writing from the New School. So I spent 2 years there learning more on craft and voice and all of those great things. And then, a lot of life happened and I was working and I was squeezing and writing. And I feel like this is a common thing with so many of us is that writing always takes the back burner because you always think everything else in life is more important and that needs to be given precedence, and you eke out the hours here and there, you try and get the writing done. And so in that, it took me 10 years to finish writing the book. Then I entered my querying process. I queried for 2 years. The first year, I got excellent responses. But my book was very long. It was 91,000 words, which is extremely long for a middle grade book, especially a debut novel.
How many pages is that roughly?
I wouldn't know how many. I would think it's like upwards of 400. So it's long. Yeah. The ideal range is anything between, I would say 55,000 and 75,000 on the upper end.
Okay.
When I was 91, you see, I really had no idea. And so I received 7 R&Rs, which are revise and resubmits from agents, basically asking me to cut down 20, 30,000 words. So I did that. I had just had a baby at the time, I remember. So it was quite a year, but I managed to do that. And then the next year I queried again. And again, I had really great responses. But then I started hearing, all of the no's trickling in. And it was, there were a wide, range of responses as to why, but largely they centered on one theme, which was that the fact that my book is a South Asian, book with South Asian characters in it, and I didn't know this then, but it came with its own set of expectations. And so one of the reasons I received was the magical world in my book, which is called Astranthia, is not an Indian-inspired world, nor is it based in mythology, which is what typically most people assume they will get to read if you're picking up a book with Indian characters. Now, when I sat to write this book, I consciously decided that my fantastical land would be this fantastical utopia in which my kids, who are from India and Indian, they go into this land which no reader would be able to geographically place. So, and it is devoid of any, racial injustices. It's a place where people are not inferior or superior based on the way they look and where they're from. The land has other issues, but not the issues that we live with in this world. So it was this fantastical utopia. And it was very much a representation of my childhood growing up in Mumbai in India, where I was obviously surrounded by all things Indian, but I'm a millennial, kid of the 90s, so had heavy influence from British pop culture, American pop culture, Hollywood, British books, because we were colonized, so we have a lot of British literature that we that we have read. Exactly, and so it's this confluence of East meets West is really essentially what my experience growing up was. So that is translated in Astranthia. There are Indian references, there are Celtic references, there are British references, there are all those Indian folklore thrown in, words are inspired from different places like that. So that was my idea. Little did I know that it wasn't marketable enough. So I had an agent that did say that it's going to be very hard to market your book as an Indian-inspired fantasy, simply because the India part of the book is only 1/3 of the book, and then the kids go into this fantasy land. So can you rewrite the fantasy world? And I was like, that's rewriting the whole book. And I didn't want to do that. Then I had some agents who asked if we could spend more time with Ria in her like a day in the life. And so Ria comes from a poor family. It's set in Darjeeling, India, which is full of tea plantations on these beautiful hills of Darjeeling. And tea pickers often come from lower income families, and her mother is a tea picker. And so, that's her social strata in society. And so they wanted me to spend more time, giving the readers more insight into that life. And I was like, but her brother has just gone missing. So how am I going to justify just her going about her day? And I kind of knew where this came from too, because I feel with, stories of other cultures, underrepresented cultures like South Asian cultures, publishers tend to want more of the pain and the suffering stories, less of the joyful stories. And that was one of the main reasons why I wrote this book, because I wanted not only Indian kids to see that every story about them does not have to be entrenched in hardships or poverty or identity struggles and very important subjects. But equally important are the stories where them being Indian is not the whole entire part of their being. They can still be heroes. They can still have magic. They can still be the ones who save the world. They can still be the ones who ride dragons and do these amazing things. And so my whole point of writing this book was that, and for other kids from other cultures to also get used to the fact that Indian kids or South Asian kids or kids of color is equally okay and cool for them to do these things. It's not just the prerogative of the white kid to be the hero and savior, to normalize the fact that any kid from any culture, from any country can do this. And so I got that. It was like, can we spend more time in Darjeeling with Ria's life? I had one agent who flat out said that she loved the book and she wished she could offer me representation, but they had just signed another South Asian author with a South Asian fantasy. And I remember thinking, no, if only I'd done this a few months ago, little realizing like, oh, you can have 20 and you would still not cover, the gamut of the South Asian experience, even in just the genre of fantasy.
Right.
So it was all of those things. And then in the middle of all of this, I had sent in my manuscript to this South Asian publishing company press they were called Bharat Babies at the time. They're now called Mango and Marigold Press. And they're a boutique publishing firm run by South Asian women. Mm-hmm. And I thought maybe they'll get it. But again, I'd sent it to them and I hadn't heard back for months. And then one fine day I did, and it was after like a week of me getting my nose and reasons like this, and where I had to come to terms with the fact that I was never going to sell this book or get an agent through this book. And what really broke my heart was, I knew I hadn't written the most perfect book in the world, but I did know that this book had potential, like for it to be a really great book. And, that certainly it was not publishable. You know what I mean? But nobody was wanting to take a chance on it. And so I had my week of, sobbing hours on end. And then I remember the thing that got me out of it, and this is why I think writers and authors are crazy people, is I was like, okay, I'm going to write another story. I willingly put myself through all of this. but that idea and like, okay, maybe I'll, I, I did think of the fact that maybe I have to think about the market that I'm trying to pitch to. This is a book industry, it's a book business. And so I was like, okay, I got a little, I guess, grew up a little bit, sadly. But then I plotted out the plot for this other book. And right then I got an email from Mango Marigold Press saying that they loved the manuscript and they'd love to set up a call. Now, I was over the moon, but then I found out the editor was white. And I was like, oh no, oh no, she's going to ask me to change everything again. And I had a call with her and she was amazing. She understood Astranthia like this. The things that she wanted me to work on were developmental things like character development, in certain places the plot sagged. And so it was, story elements, not the fact that it didn't revolve around the cultural aspect of the book. And so, yeah, and then the rest is history. And then we signed in 2020 and now here we are. It's been a very long journey.
Well, especially because, like you say, we talk a lot about the need for diversity in children's books, but that I don't think a lot of us who are outside of that industry, that who aren't authors or in publishing, understand all the pressures that you're facing. It sounds like your book wasn't Indian enough.
Yes.
In some respects, in terms of the fantasy world, not recognizing that so many kids, we all grow up with different influences, but white authors don't face the need to make their books, just about European influence or European
exactly.
or anything. And it also strikes me about it really highlights, although you ended up having the woman that you spoke with in the end was white, but the publishing house itself is run by South Asian women. Yes. That it shows the need for diversity throughout the industry, not just that we need more diverse authors, which we absolutely do, but how important it is to have people on the other end that, like you said, they get what you're trying to do.
Absolutely. Like my publisher, she said this was the book my 12-year-old self would have wanted to read. Yes. And because as, coming from a different culture than the majority here in the States, again, so many people say, you come from a minority culture. And I always sort of chuckle and I'm like, technically, I'm Indian, we're 1 billion strong. Like I wouldn't call ourselves a minority, but that's the reality, right? You just don't see enough of us. And so hence that's the notion. And so you're boxed into whatever is just known from the little material that is published. And one forgets that there are just countless experiences of a culture just like that we see on the day-to-day with Caucasian culture, that we still have to break these barriers. And absolutely. And like even like with publishing now with the two big companies, the two big publishing houses sort of thinking to join forces, Simon & Schuster and Penguin Random House. It's just like, where do we just need so many more presses that represent other cultures, and I'm here to promote that. Because I feel like in literature, we don't, like the world is such a melting pot and technology has brought everybody so much closer, but in literature, you just don't see enough yet. It's changing, which is good. You just don't see that reflection.
That's true, because you're particularly in the space of middle grade novels and also the fantasy genre. Does that have its own particular pressures around those? I'm not as familiar with that.
100%. That's the thing with this book. I didn't realize that just by writing this, because in my head, the thought I had was, why can't Harry Potter be Indian? Right. Why not? And so I was like, that was the reason. I was like, I want to create a book in which that's the case. In a sense, you have this fantastical situation. You have this hero, and she's Indian. And he's Indian. Little did I know that just by including the Indian element meant that I suddenly had to somehow comment on social, political, give that commentary in my book, which doesn't fit with the book that I am telling. And yet they want to see that. So they then want to see more of the struggle. But not everybody in India has those struggles. Not everybody comes from poverty. Not everybody has an identity struggle. Now, I don't have an identity struggle because I grew up in India. I spent all my adult years there. I moved to the US when I was 25. So, I knew who I was. I did not feel that. So but just because, and I understand where they're coming from, but in the US, an immigrant kid definitely has those issues and has to sometimes fight against that and find out who they are and, battle both cultures in them and find their authentic self. But that's not my experience. But that doesn't mean that mine is diminished.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is that, I've said this so many times in interviews, but it's such a telling thing that when I did write this book, the very first draft, when I was, frustrated and I wrote the first 70,000 words of this story, those 2 paragraphs that I wrote in it, and I expanded from that, it was all with white characters. I had Ria was Rose, her brother Rohan was Bryant, their mother was Hyacinth Bennett. The nod to Pride and Prejudice right there. It was set in the English countryside. They had scones for breakfast, and they did all of these things that I had never done in my life before. Yet I wrote 70,000 words of this whole story. Not realizing or not stopping for a moment in those several months that I wrote it to think, well, this isn't my story. Like, this has nothing of me in there. It didn't occur to me even for 1 second. I was comfortable enough to make up all of these things simply because I had just read all of my children's books.
Right.
Were all white. And so it was just a default. And when I say this, in like lectures or in panels like this, and I'm like, can you imagine sitting down and thinking, oh, I'm going to write this story, and I'm saying this to, white kids. Mm-hmm. Imagine that the very first thought that comes to you is like, of course I'm going to write a story about an Indian kid from India. Like, it's right. That ludicrous. Mm-hmm. And yet that came so instinctually for me. Mm-hmm. And I had not realized until that moment that I had the realization. It was a small writing workshop that I did in Mumbai, and I read the first chapter, and the teacher was just like, she was just defeated. She's like, she didn't comment on anything. She was just like, why are they white? And I remember being so pissed. I was like, she didn't say anything about my prose or, nothing. And I was like offended, like, whatever. And I was on my way back. And I'm like, yeah, but like, why didn't I? And it was then that I realized that, oh my gosh, my love for books and all of that began and that has, still remained. And I still cherish every single book that I read as a kid and the ones that shaped me. But they whitewashed me to the extent that I completely negated an experience. And I'm proud to be Indian. I'm proud, and yet it was so easy to just completely erase it.
The imaginative world was more white.
Yeah, it was white. And it was like, I guess it was, as I think about it now, I'm like, I must have thought, or unconsciously must have been like, well, there's never been a world in which there are Indian kids in books. So who would want to read that? Why would anyone want to read about Indian kids? And that was so heartbreaking. And I know that this is not a unique story. This has happened to so many of us POC authors and writers whose default is to tell stories that are outside of their culture, outside of their lived experience, which is okay if it's a choice you have made. If I've chosen, and logically thought this through and said, this is what I want to write, this is the story, and I'm choosing not to write about my Indian experience, I'm choosing to write about this experience, that's fine. You do your due diligence and all of that. But to have not thought about that was the part that really shook me. And I realized more than ever in the genre fantasy, so in the joy stories, there's black joy, well, I'm talking about brown joy. There are just very few brown joy stories. And even today, if you think of middle grade fantasy stories with South Asian characters, you can probably get to 20 if you're lucky. And then if you look at stories that are set primarily in India or have kids who are from India, I think maybe not even 5. So yeah, there is a huge dearth. And then you're expected to carry and bring all of this that they want in a story because they just don't want all of the joy stuff. They want this because that's expected to come. Nobody expects that. And it's not like there's no suffering in this book. Ria is a very conflicted character. She comes from not a broken family, but a very dysfunctional family. Her father has passed and when she was very young, and nobody talks about him. Her mother is very aloof. She is battling the needing that love from her mother, but her mother's clearly, going through her own issues. She feels like she's losing her twin brother, they were so tight when they were young, and now they're 12, and he's sort of leading his own life in school. He's the popular kid. She's very introverted. She has serious trust issues. She doesn't have any friends. Like, she's going through a lot of things that, some 12-year-olds go through. So this isn't just, all rainbows and sunshine, but I'm expected to bring some Indian baggage that is solely related to the Indian experience, when the fact is all cultures have baggage, and the human experience is so, largely universal, that what I wanted with this book is that, I did not want it to be a textbook. I don't want to teach anybody about Indian culture. I can't even. It's so vast. But I want you to enjoy the little snippets that I've thrown in and that I've woven into this story. I don't want that to take you out of the story, because I want it to be seamless, just like really good white stories are. I don't stop and go like, oh, now let me learn about Canada. It doesn't happen that way. Right. Throw in food and culture and my Indian experiences in there, but seamlessly. And also to show, and then also want the readers to almost forget that they're reading about an Indian kid, because I want them to connect with Ria on a human level, not on a race level, not on a level of, oh, we match our skin colors or we don't match our skin colors. I grew up reading books that I had no commonality with in terms of any physical appearance or the places I lived in, but yet I connected with them completely. Some of them were my best friends, in my head when I was a kid. Right. And that's the universality of stories. So why, when someone is writing from a different culture, that it's suddenly like, oh, well, that story is for Indian kids or for Mexican kids or for Black kids. When in fact, and I say this with librarians and teachers, like, you should recommend my book to any kid who says they love fantasy. Right. Because it's important for those kids to also see a different perspective, a different way of life, and then also realize how similar they are. It creates empathy. It creates doors and mirrors and windows, and there's so many similarities between cultures around the world, and yeah, I think I went off track. I just went off.
No, this is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted to get into, because it really, like you said, I mean, it talks about having the joy and creating it for people who maybe aren't Indian, to the readers to have that empathy, but also for Indian kids to read it and feel like, yes, I can be the princess. I can be the one fighting dragons. I can be the one in this world. And I think the character, like you say, is so relatable that something that all children should be able to relate, to be able to kind of see themselves in the book. And like you said, not to be kind of pigeonholed. And it seems like, POC authors are expected, or just creators in general, because I've seen this in film also, that they're expected to carry all of the weight of the culture and the expectations, and instead of just being able to have fun and write a good story. And like you said, sometimes there are people that they want to go into that, and maybe that's what they want to talk about, but you should have the freedom to choose the story that speaks to you. So, and I'm so glad that it got published without that you were able to resist the pressure to change the story.
I'm so glad. Yeah. I thank my stars every day. And then I'm like, I guess the story was meant to be. But there was a point when I was very, very certain that it wasn't. And yeah, I'm so proud of it. I mean, it's by no means a perfect story, but it has, when I released the cover of this book back in September 2020. Oh, thank you. Beverly Johnson, she's the illustrator, the awesome illustrator for this book. When I released the cover, the number of messages I received from adult women, 30-year-old women, moms, the 30-year-old women, messaging me to say, oh my God, like, my 12-year-old or my 10-year-old self is screaming with happiness right now. I had 3 Rias message me. One of them had the exact same spelling, and she was like this, and she was so happy. The other 2 had different spellings, like R-I-Y-A, and one was, I think, R-I-A. yeah, RIA, RIAH or something like that. And then they were like, but the fact that it's my
Right.
name on the book. And, again, that just goes to show how much of how much of this is needed, just
Yeah.
representation across the board, that it so matters, and you don't realize it until you see it. Um, that you want it that much more. It's just so needed, especially now. I think the world is, it's it can be a not nice place, and I think books can definitely help. Um, because it reaches young minds. These I love the age group of middle grade, because they're still young, they're still innocent, but they're growing up, and they're sort of so hyper aware of everything that's going on around them. And it's like suddenly, you're conscious about yourself, what you look like, who your friends are, who you want your friends to be. Why are my parents fighting? What's going on? Why is my family different from that? There's so many things. So these are young kids and young minds, but grappling with really big life situations. And I think fantasy just affords that amazing balance between, going off to fight a dragon, but then
Right.
also dealing with these, difficult, big picture issues. And it's really fun to straddle them both.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, and I love, like, that's the age where they're also like, if you go on this dragon ride, they're like in on the ride, no one's questioning anything.
Let's
So
go.
it's yeah, let's go. So it's really fun writing fantasy for middle grade, because you can really go crazy with your imagination.
Well, I can relate to the comment that you got, that this is the book that I would have wanted to read when I was a kid, because I've ordered it from the library, and unfortunately I thought I ordered it in plenty of time, but it hasn't come yet. So, but I'm very much looking forward to reading it with my kids. I'm really looking
Thank
forward. And um, just to wrap up, can you give us a preview? Because I know this is part of a series, right? When can
Yes.
we expect the next book? And can you give us kind of a preview of what? Because it's the Chronicles of a. I don't know if I can say
That's fun.
as
Yeah.
Francias, yes.
Yes, so the sequel is currently scheduled to come out in 2023. And I am in the process of still finalizing the manuscript. But what I can say is that, so the second book, so the first book is about, Rhea going to save Rohan and rescue him. And there are lots of secrets about her own identity and past that she has no idea about, that get revealed to you. And in the second book, they are now, well, spoiler alert, that she does save her brother. And but in the second book, they now have a bigger problem to face. I'm trying to say this without giving away anything, so that's why it's pretty big. But there's a villain in the first book,
Mhm.
and the villain exists in the second book as well. But there's also a mega villain. This book spends a lot more time in Astranthia, and we really get into the sibling dynamics. Like in the first book, you get a little bit of it, but for most part, Rhea and Rohan are, in different places in the book, because he's captured and she's finding him. But in this book, they're together, and there's a mission at hand again, and they need to band together and fix it before everything just falls apart. But it's bigger, it's darker. There's a big battle scene,
Mm.
and someone that the readers get to know, and hopefully, well, I won't say that, get to know in book one, might die in book two.
No.
So when you read the book, you can be like, I wonder
Now,
who
now
this
I'm going
is.
to think about that with all of the characters, which one it is.
Just don't tell your kids; that will ruin it. But you can have that at the
I
back
will
of your
try.
head.
Well, it was
But
such a pleasure to
we'll
talk
see
with
what my editor. Oh, thank you.
you. Yes,
Same
and I'm
here.
really looking forward to reading the book. And thank you for sharing your experiences, what we can look forward to reading in this book, in Re in the Blood of the Nectar, and in the sequel.
An excerpt from the book. And also the really cool part about this, there are two maps.
Oh,
This
yeah.
one,
I love those.
yeah. So this one is the town that she lives in Darjeeling, and there's a map of India, and it tells you where Darjeeling is. This is a fictitious map, but it's inspired by a real town. And then that's the map of Astranthia. Um, So yeah, so I love, you know,
I love
fantasy
those.
books should have maps. So I'm really lucky. I got two. So I love that.
Oh, good. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to reading. Maybe we'll have to have you back on after your out.
I would love that. Thank you so much. This was so
All
much
right.
fun.